The shuttle descended through the golden clouds of Velthury Prime, carrying what many considered to be a mistake wrapped in human skin. Una Park pressed her face against the small window and watched the massive academy come into view below, its towers reaching toward 3 distant suns like fingers trying to touch the heavens. And her heart beat faster with every passing second. She was 16 years old, born in a small town in Korea on a planet called Earth. And now she was about to become the first human to ever walk through the gates of the most prestigious school in the entire galaxy. The Velthury Prime Academy accepted only the best of the best, the top students from hundreds of alien worlds, beings with minds that could process information faster than any computer humans had ever built. Una knew she did not belong here by their standards, but she had received the invitation anyway, and she was not the type to say no to an opportunity. When the shuttle landed on the crystalline platform, she grabbed her single bag and stepped outside, into air that smelled like flowers she could not name. Thousands of students had gathered for the orientation ceremony, and every single one of them turned to look at her. She saw the Crethni first, tall beings with bodies that seemed to be made of living glass, their minds visible as swirling lights inside their transparent skulls. The Sovani stood in groups, their 4 brains working together to process the world in ways humans could never understand. The Melthury moved like liquid silver, their forms shifting as they communicated through frequencies beyond human hearing. And then there was Una, small and soft and completely ordinary. She smiled and bowed to the nearest group of students, a gesture of respect from her culture. But they only stared at her with confusion before turning away. The human has arrived, someone whispered loud enough for her to hear. And laughter followed. Una kept smiling because that was what she always did when things got hard. The orientation hall was a massive dome filled with floating platforms where students sat according to their species and academic ranking. Una was directed to the lowest platform at the very back, so far from the main stage that she could barely see the speakers. Counselor Vethran, the academy director, was a Crethni whose crystalline body glowed with centuries of accumulated knowledge. "Welcome to Velthury Prime Academy," the counselor announced, their voice resonating through the hall without any visible technology. "You are here because you represent the finest minds your worlds have produced, and you will be challenged in ways you cannot imagine." Una listened carefully and took notes on a small paper notebook. Another thing that made the alien students laugh at her. "This semester you will prove your worth," Vethran continued. "Those who cannot meet our standards will be sent home, for we do not waste resources on those who cannot contribute to galactic progress." After the ceremony, Una was assigned to Dormitory Block 7, which turned out to be an old storage facility that had been hastily converted into living quarters. Her room was small and cold, and the lighting flickered every few minutes. But she unpacked her few belongings and made it feel like home. She placed a photograph of her family on the small desk and looked at their smiling faces for a long moment before getting ready for her first test. The welcoming assessment was designed to measure each student's cognitive abilities through a complex, multi-dimensional logic puzzle. Students were given holographic cubes that contained thousands of interconnected problems, and they had to solve as many as possible within 1 hour. Una sat at her assigned station and watched as the Crethni students finished dozens of problems in the first minute alone. The Servani worked even faster, their 4 brains dividing the work with perfect efficiency. Una looked at her own cube and felt her stomach drop because the symbols made no sense to her at all. She took a deep breath and started working, slowly figuring out the patterns one small piece at a time. 15 minutes into the test, she noticed a Melthury student at the station beside her struggling badly. The student's silver form kept flickering with distress, and Una could see that she was about to give up entirely without thinking. Una leaned over and pointed to a pattern the Melthury had missed. Using simple gestures to explain what she saw, the Melthari looked at her with surprise, but followed her suggestion. And suddenly, the problem started making sense. Yuna spent the next 20 minutes helping not just that student, but 2 others nearby who were also falling behind. When the timer ended, Yuna had completed fewer problems than anyone else in the entire academy. The results were announced publicly, and her name appeared at the very bottom of the ranking. The human finished last, Tethril announced loudly, a young Crethany whose crystalline body pulsed with arrogant light. What a surprise that the primitive species cannot compete with real intelligence. His friends laughed, and Yuna felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. But she said nothing. Later that night, Instructor Kelmos reviewed the test recordings in his private office. He was an old Sorvani who had taught at the academy for over 200 years. And he had seen countless students come and go. Something about the human girl had caught his attention during the test. Something that did not make sense according to any logic. He understood. He watched the recording again and saw how Yuna had stopped working on her own problems to help others. He saw how the 3 students she helped had all improved their scores dramatically after her intervention. He ran calculations in all 4 of his brains and arrived at the same conclusion. Each time, the human had sacrificed her own ranking to lift others up, and she had done it without hesitation or expectation of reward. Interesting, Kelmos murmured to himself. Most interesting indeed. He saved the recording and made a note to watch this human more closely in the coming weeks. Perhaps there was more to Yuna Park than her test scores suggested. Perhaps the galaxy's understanding of intelligence was not as complete as everyone believed. In her small room in dormitory block 7, Yuna looked at the photograph of her family one more time before closing her eyes. "I will make you proud," she whispered into the darkness. "I promise I will find a way." And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that her way would be different from everyone else, but different was not the same as wrong. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Yuna's young life, but she refused to let anyone see her struggle. Every morning she woke up before the sun rose and studied until her eyes burned, trying to understand concepts that alien children learned before they could walk. Her grades remained stubbornly average, floating somewhere in the middle, while the brilliant students around her soared to heights she could not reach. The professors spoke too fast and used words that had no translation in any human language, and Yuna often found herself lost within. The first few minutes of each lecture she fell asleep and advanced quantum theory because her human body demanded rest that alien bodies did not need. She ate 3 meals a day in the dining hall while other students watched her with disgust, unable to understand why any being would need so much fuel just to function. "Look at the human stuffing her face again," Tethril said loudly one afternoon as Yuna sat alone with her food. "The species spends half their lives either eating or sleeping, and they wonder why they are so far behind the rest of the galaxy." His crystalline friends laughed, and Yuna pretended not to hear, focusing on her rice and vegetables as if they were the most interesting things in the universe. But the loneliness was starting to weigh on her heart like a stone that grew heavier with each passing day. Everything changed during a crisis simulation exercise. In her 3rd week at the academy, the scenario involved a transport ship that had lost life support while carrying 500 passengers. 2 deep space students were expected to calculate the optimal evacuation algorithm, determining which passengers should be saved based on their value to society and the resources available. Yuna watched as her classmates typed furiously on their holographic interfaces, their minds racing through millions of calculations per second. The Crethany students finished first, presenting elegant solutions that sacrificed exactly 32% of the passengers to save the rest. The Servani proposed an even more efficient model that reduced the loss to 28% by prioritizing younger passengers. With higher potential contributions, Yun stared at her screen and felt something twist inside her chest. These were not numbers on a screen to her. They were lives, mothers and fathers, and children who deserved to go home to their families. She stood up suddenly and walked toward the simulation pod at the center of the room. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. Una ignored them and climbed inside the pod. Activating the manual interface that no one had used in decades, the simulation surrounded her with the failing ship. Alarms blaring and passengers screaming for help. She did not calculate who to save and who to abandon, and instead she grabbed a toolkit and started working on the broken life support system with her own two hands. The other students watched in stunned silence as Yuna crawled through maintenance tunnels and reconnected severed cables with nothing but human fingers and human determination. She burned her hands on hot metal and cut her arms on sharp edges. But she did not stop. 30 minutes into the exercise, she managed to restore partial life support to the entire ship. It was not perfect. The air would be thin and cold, but everyone would survive long enough for rescue to arrive. Time, the instructor announced. And the simulation ended. Yuna climbed out of the pod with blood on her hands and sweat on her forehead, her chest heaving from the effort. The human completed the scenario in half the allotted time, Instructor Kelmos noted, his four brains processing what he had just witnessed. And she achieved a 0% casualty rate, but she did not follow the correct method, another professor argued. The exercise was designed to test optimization algorithms, not manual labor. The exercise was designed to save lives, Kelmos replied quietly. And she saved all of them. The debate continued for hours after class ended. But Yuna did not care about the outcome. She had done what felt right. And that was enough for her. That evening she found a small Malthury student crying alone in the garden behind dormitory block 7. The student's silver form flickered weakly, and Yuna recognized her as Selvani, one of the students she had helped during the entrance assessment. "Are you okay?" Yuna asked softly as she sat down beside her. Selvani looked up with eyes that swirled with pain, her form shifting more slowly than any Malthury Yuna had ever seen. "I process information too slowly," Selvani whispered. "The other Malthury call me broken, and the professor's saying I will never keep up with the curriculum." Yuna nodded and reached out to touch Selvani's hand, feeling the cool smoothness of her liquid metal skin. "I process information slowly too," Yuna said with a gentle smile. "Maybe we can be slow together." From that day forward, Yuna and Selvani became inseparable. They studied together every evening, with Yuna teaching Selvani the techniques she had learned back on Earth. She showed her how to break big problems into smaller pieces, how to use repetition to build understanding, how to celebrate small victories instead of focusing on failures. "Why do you keep telling me I am doing well?" Selvani asked one night, confused by the constant encouragement. "The data clearly shows that my performance is below average." "Because you are doing well," Yuna replied. "You are trying hard and getting better every day. And that is what matters." Selvani did not understand the logic, but something about Yuna's words made her feel stronger. Instructor Kelmos watched their friendship develop from his office, tracking both students' academic performance with growing curiosity. Selena's grades were improving, slowly but steadily, rising in ways that defied the projections his four brains had calculated. But it was not just Selvani. Every student who spent time with the human seemed to perform better afterward, as if her presence activated something inside them that the Academy's advanced methods could not reach. "Fascinating," Kelmos murmured as he reviewed the data for the 100th time. "Truly fascinating." He made a request to Earth's educational archives, seeking any information that might explain the phenomenon. Perhaps the answer lay not in what the human could do, but in what she inspired others to become. The tension between Yuna and Tethril had been building for weeks, growing like a storm that everyone could see, but no one could stop. He mocked her in the hallways and whispered insults during classes, his crystalline body pulsing with contempt whenever she walked by. His friends joined in, making jokes about human stupidity and human weakness. And Yuna endured it all with the same quiet smile she always wore. But Tethril wanted more than silence from her. He wanted submission. He wanted to prove once and for all that humans had no place among the galaxies. Elite one morning, he stood before the entire student body in the main hall and issued a challenge that echoed through the crystalline dome like thunder. "I challenge the human to an academic duel," he announced, his voice dripping with confidence. According to ancient academy tradition, two students may compete in live problem-solving before their peers, and the loser must accept the judgment of the winner. The crowd fell silent and every eye turned to Yuna, who stood alone near the back of the hall. "If I win," Tethril continued, "the human must admit publicly that her species does not belong at Velthary Prime Academy, that she was a mistake who should never have been admitted." Yuna felt her heart pound against her ribs, but she forced herself to walk forward through the crowd until she stood face to face with her tormentor. "I accept your challenge," she said in a voice that did not waver. "But I have a condition of my own." Tethril laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're in no position to make demands." "Human, if I win," Yuna continued as if he had not spoken, "you must apologize to Selvani for every cruel thing you have said about her. And you must do it in front of everyone." The crowd gasped, and Ross' crystalline form flickered with surprise and anger. Selvani, standing somewhere in the crowd, felt tears forming in her silver eyes. "Fine," Tethril spat. "It does not matter because you cannot possibly win. Your primitive brain is no match for Crethany intelligence." The duel was scheduled for the following day. Giving both competitors time to prepare, Yuna spent the night studying with Selvani, though she knew that no amount of preparation could match the processing power inside Tethril's crystalline skull. "You should not have done this for me," Selvani whispered as they sat together in Yuna's small room. "You will be humiliated in front of everyone." Yuna smiled and squeezed her friend's hand. "Maybe I will, but at least I tried." And trying is never something to be ashamed of. The next day, the entire academy gathered in the grand arena, a massive amphitheater where legendary scholars had debated the greatest questions in galactic history. Yuna walked to her podium and looked out at thousands of alien faces staring back at her with curiosity and contempt, and something that might have been hope. Tethril stood at his podium across from her, his body blazing with confident light. Grand Scholar Morath, the oldest and most respected teacher at the academy, rose to announce the challenge. He had not spoken publicly in decades, and his presence alone signaled how significant this moment had become. "The challenge is the Velkruth paradox," Morath announced, "a theoretical physics problem that has confounded our greatest minds for over 3,000 years. Solve it if you can." The problem appeared on holographic screens throughout the arena, a maze of equations and contradictions that seemed to loop back on themselves endlessly. Tethril immediately began processing, his crystalline mind running through millions of calculations every second. Yuna stared at the equations and felt her stomach sink because she could not even understand what the problem was asking. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to quiet the fear that screamed inside her head. When she opened them again, she did not look at the equations. Instead, she looked at the pattern they created, the shape of the problem rather than its mathematical content. Something about it reminded her of a puzzle her grandmother used to give her when she was a child. "What if you cannot solve it because it is not meant to be solved?" her grandmother would say. What if the answer is in understanding why the puzzle exists at all? Yuna's hands trembled as she activated her podium's interface. "I have a question," she said, her voice small but clear in the silent arena. "Why do we assume the paradox needs a solution at all?" Tethro paused his calculations and looked at her with disbelief. "What kind of stupid question is that? Of course it needs a solution. That is the entire point. But what if the paradox exists to show us something?" Yuna continued, her thoughts flowing faster now. "What if it is not a problem to be solved, but a mirror to reflect how the universe maintains balance?" She began speaking about the equations not as mathematics, but as philosophy, describing how the contradictions might represent the natural tension between order and chaos that allowed reality to exist. She talked about how some questions were not meant to have answers, how the search itself might be more valuable than any destination. The arena fell completely silent as she spoke. Deathroll's calculations continued, but his crystalline form had stopped pulsing with confidence when both competitors finished. The judges deliberated for what felt like hours. Neither contestant has solved the Velkrath paradox. The head judge finally announced, however, "The human's approach has opened an entirely new avenue of investigation that our scholars will study for years to come." Grand Scholar Mora stood once more, and everyone held their breath. The Krethni attempted to overpower the problem with superior processing, Mara said slowly. But the human chose to understand it instead. She did not solve the paradox. She transcended it. The arena erupted in confused murmuring as students tried to understand what had just happened. "This duel has no clear winner," Morith concluded, "but it has revealed something important about the nature of intelligence itself." Yuna looked at Tethro and saw shame and fury warring inside his transparent form. "You did not win," he hissed at her as the crowd dispersed. "I owe you nothing." Yuna nodded sadly, knowing there was nothing she could say to change his mind. That night she returned to her dormitory to find Selvani's door open and her room. Destroyed research notes were scattered everywhere. Her project for the semester examination torn to pieces. Selvani sat in the middle of the destruction, her silver form barely holding together as she wept. Yuna knelt beside her friend and held her close, saying nothing because sometimes there were no words, but inside her heart, a fire was starting to burn. 6 months had passed since Yuna Park first arrived at Velthari Prime Academy, and something remarkable had changed within its ancient walls. Her grades remained stubbornly average, hovering somewhere in the middle of the rankings where they had always been. But everywhere she looked, she saw things that had not existed before. Students of different species sat together in study circles, helping each other understand difficult concepts instead of competing in isolation. The Krethni shared their processing techniques with the Servani, who taught the Melthari new ways of organizing information. And at the center of every group, there was always someone who remembered Yuna's simple lesson: we rise by lifting others. Selvani had become one of the top students in her class, her grades climbing steadily through the power of repetition and encouragement and the simple belief that she was not broken. She still processed information more slowly than other Melthari, but she had learned to use her extra time to think more deeply and see patterns that faster minds missed. Even Tethro was different now. His community service had forced him to spend time with struggling students, teaching them the basics that came so easily to his crystalline mind. At first he had done it with resentment, counting the days until his punishment ended. But somewhere along the way, he had started to care about whether his students succeeded. Yuna had watched him smile for the first time when a young Selvani finally understood a concept that had frustrated her for weeks. It was a small smile, barely visible through his transparent form, but it was real. The academy itself had begun to change in ways no one had anticipated. A new course appeared in the curriculum: Human Social Dynamics. Taught by instructor Kelmos himself, it studied cooperation, empathy, and the strange human belief that helping others was not a weakness, but a strength. The course became the most requested elective in Academy history, with students from every species fighting for a spot. Grand Scholar Morth watched these changes from his tower and felt something he had not felt in centuries. Hope then came the day that tested everything the Academy had learned. Research station orbiting a nearby moon experienced catastrophic systems failure. Hundreds of scientists were trapped inside with no power, no life support, and no way to call for help. The Academy received a distress signal because they were the closest facility with the resources to mount a rescue. The calculations were grim. The station would run out of emergency air in 4 hours. Proper rescue mission would take 6 hours to organize. The mathematics said that everyone on that station was already dead. Yuna heard the announcement in her dormitory and felt her heart stop. Then she started running. She burst into the command center, where Counselor Vethran and the senior faculty were already calculating evacuation priorities, trying to decide which scientists to save with the limited time and resources available. We cannot save them all. Vethran was saying we must focus on the most valuable researchers. No, Yuna said loudly, and every alien in the room turned to stare at her. The human speaks out of turn. Someone muttered, "I have a plan." Yuna continued, ignoring the protests. "But I need everyone to work together." She laid out her idea quickly, using simple words and clear logic instead of sending one large rescue ship in 6 hours. They would send dozens of small shuttles immediately. Each shuttle could carry a few scientists to safety, creating a chain of rescues that would empty the station piece by piece. The shuttles are not designed for rescue operations. Vethran objected. The pilots would be at significant risk. Then I will pilot the first one, Yuna said. Who will? Come with me. Silence filled the command center. Then Selvani stepped forward, her silver form shining with determination. I will go. Tethral moved to stand beside her, his crystalline body pulsing with something that looked like courage. So, will I. One by one, students from every species volunteered, following the example of a small human girl who refused to accept that some lives were worth less than others. The rescue was chaos and terror and desperate. Improvisation from start to finish. Yuna piloted her shuttle through debris fields that should have been impossible. To navigate, she docked with the failing station, while alarms screamed warnings about structural collapse. She carried scientists on her back through corridors filled with smoke, using nothing but human strength and human stubbornness to keep moving forward. Behind her came Selvani and Tethral and dozens of others, each one pushing past their fear to save just one more life. When Yuna's arms gave out, alien hands caught her and carried her the rest of the way. When a shuttle failed, 3 others diverted to pick up its passengers. When the mathematics said they were out of time, they kept going anyway, because that was what they had learned from the human, and against every calculation and prediction, they succeeded. Every single scientist was rescued with minutes to spare. Station collapsed into the moon's atmosphere. Just as the last shuttle cleared the debris field, Yuna watched it fall from the window of her shuttle and felt tears streaming down her face. At the year-end ceremony, the entire academy gathered to honor those who had made the rescue. Possible Counselor Vethran stood at the podium with a humility that no one had ever seen before. 6 months ago, Vethran announced, I believed that this academy existed to cultivate the greatest minds in the galaxy. I believed that intelligence was measured in processing speed and computational power. The counselor paused and looked directly at Yuna. I was wrong. Grand Scholar Morth rose and approached the podium carrying a small crystal that glowed with inner light. Today we create a new honor, Morth announced, the first in this academy's 3,000-year history. We call it the Volthary Heart, and it will be given each year to the student who best embodies what true excellence means. He turned to face Yuna as the entire academy held its breath, True excellence is not what you achieve alone. Morith said, "It is what you inspire in others." He placed the crystal in Yuna's hands, and it began to glow brighter than any star. The human showed us that strength is not found in superior intelligence or advanced technology. Vethran continued, "Strength is found in choosing to help others when it would be easier to walk away. It is found in believing that everyone has value. It is found in the simple act of caring." Yuna stood at the podium and looked out at the faces before Hirsch. Saw Krithani and Sorvani and Melthari and dozens of other species, all watching her with eyes that had learned to see the universe differently. She saw Selvani beaming with pride and Tethril nodding with respect. She saw friends she had made by simply being herself. Yuna bowed deeply, the way her grandmother had taught her back on Earth, and smiled the same smile she had worn on her very first day. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for giving me a chance." And in that moment, everyone in the grand arena understood that the galaxy would never be the same, because one ordinary human girl had taught them that the heart was the most extraordinary thing of all. Yuna did not sleep that night or the night after that. She sat with Selvani in the ruined room and made a promise that she would help rebuild everything that had been destroyed. "Your project took 6 months to complete," Yuna said softly. "We have 3 weeks before the examination deadline. But we can do this if we work together." Selvani shook her silver head weakly. "It is impossible. I cannot even remember all the data I collected. It is lost forever." "Then we will collect it again," Yuna replied. "We will start from the beginning, and we will work every single day until it is finished." Other students would have reported the incident to the Academy authorities and waited for justice to be served. Yuna did not even consider that option. She had learned long ago that waiting for others to fix your problems only led to disappointment and delay instead. She pulled out her paper notebook and began writing down everything Selvani could remember about her. Research they worked through the night, piecing together fragments of data like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. When morning came, Yuna went to her classes with dark circles under her eyes and a mind that screamed for rest. She fell asleep twice during lectures and received her lowest marks in the semester on a surprise examination. But every evening she returned to Selvani's room and continued the work without complaint. "Why are you doing this?" Selvani asked one night as they reconstructed a particularly complex data set. "You are hurting your own academic standing by helping me. The logic does not make sense." Yuna smiled through her exhaustion. "Because you are my friend, and friends help each other even when it costs something." "But what do you gain from this friendship?" Selvani pressed, genuinely confused. "I have nothing to offer you. I cannot improve your grades or increase your social standing. I am considered defective by my own people." Yuna set down her work and looked at Selvani with eyes full of warmth. "I gain you," she said simply. "I gain someone who makes me laugh and thinks about the universe in ways I never could. I gain someone who cares about me, not because of what I can do, but because of who I am." Selvani stared at her for a long moment, her silver form flickering with emotions she had never felt before. "Humans are very strange," she finally said. "Yes," Yuna laughed. "Yes, we are." Instructor Kalmos had been watching these events unfold with growing fascination. He had finally received the records he requested from Earth, and what he found inside them shattered everything he thought he understood about intelligence. Suna Park was not a genius by any galactic standard. Her test scores on Earth had been average at best. Her academic ranking completely unremarkable, but her file was filled with something Kalmos had never seen in any student record. From any world in the galaxy, there were dozens of commendations for volunteer work at hospitals and community centers. There were letters from teachers praising not her intelligence but her kindness, her willingness to stay behind and help Struggling students, even when it cost her valuable study time. There was a recommendation letter from her school principal. That made Kalmos read it 3 times with all 4 of his brains working together. Una Park may not be our brightest student, the letter said, but she makes everyone around her brighter. She has a gift that cannot be measured by examinations. She makes people believe in themselves. Kalmos closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. The galaxy measured intelligence in processing speed and memory capacity and problem-solving efficiency, but humans had developed something different. Something that could not be quantified or calculated. They called it heart. They called it love. They called it caring about others more than yourself. And Kalmos was beginning to believe that this strange human trait might be the most powerful form of intelligence in the entire universe. 2 days before the examination deadline, an investigation uncovered evidence that Tethral was responsible for destroying Selvani's research. Security recordings showed him entering her room while she was away, and traces of his crystalline signature were found on the damaged materials. The Academy Council convened an emergency hearing to determine his punishment according to Academy rules. The deliberate sabotage of another student's work was grounds for immediate expulsion. Tethral stood before the council with his crystalline body dimmed by shame, unable to deny what he had done. The evidence is clear, Counselor Vethrin announced. Tethral will be expelled from Velthari Prime Academy, effective immediately. The chamber fell silent as everyone waited for the sentence to be carried out. But then a small voice spoke from the back of the room. "May I say something?" Una asked, stepping forward without permission. The council members looked at each other with confusion, unsure whether to allow this unprecedented interruption. Grand Scholar Morth nodded slowly. "The human may speak." Una walked to the center of the chamber and stood beside Tethral, the boy who had tormented her since her first day at the academy. "I asked the council to show mercy," she said. "I asked that Tethral be given a second chance." Gasps echoed through the chamber, and Tethral himself stared at her with disbelief. "He destroyed your friend's work," Vethrin said incredulously. "He has bullied you for months. Why would you speak for him?" Una was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Because everyone deserves a chance to become better," she finally said. "Punishment teaches people what not to do, but mercy teaches them who they could be." She turned to look at Tethral directly. "I do not forgive what you did," she said honestly, "but I believe you can change if you choose to, and I want you to have that chance." The council deliberated for hours before reaching a decision. Tethral would not be expelled, but he would serve 1 year of community service helping struggling students, and any further violations would result in permanent removal as the chamber emptied. Tethral approached Una with his crystalline form flickering uncertainly. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you help me after everything I did?" Una looked at him with tired eyes and a gentle smile. "Because that is what humans do," she said. "We believe in second chances. We believe people can change. And we choose hope over revenge." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing alone with thoughts that would change him forever.